Senator's wife walked into the emergency room at 2 a.m., wearing sunglasses and a story about falling down the stairs. But the nurse behind the counter had seen that exact story 40 times before, and this time, she did something no one else in Sienna Prescott's life had the courage to do. She picked up the phone and called someone who would actually listen. Have you ever watched someone smile through a nightmare and wondered what it would take for them to finally wake up? Have you ever known, deep in your gut, that someone you loved was in danger but felt powerless to prove it? This is the story of a woman who was married to the most charming man in Washington, a man whose public speeches about protecting families hid the bruises he left on his own wife's skin. And this is the story of what happened when she stopped being afraid. But before justice could find him, something had to break first, and it wasn't her. Hit that subscribe button and stay with me, because this story will make you rethink everything you believe about who deserves power and what happens when they abuse it. Let me take you back to the morning everything changed. Sienna Prescott stood in the bathroom of their Georgetown townhouse, dabbing concealer over the purple crescent beneath her left eye. With the precision of a woman who had turned survival into an art form, the mirror reflected back someone she barely recognized. 31 years old, a Georgetown law degree she'd never used, and a husband whose name appeared on campaign billboards across the state of Virginia. Victor Ashford was running for his second Senate term, and his approval ratings had never been higher. His wife's spirit had never been lower. She heard his footsteps on the hardwood, that particular rhythm she'd learned to decode like a foreign language. Quick steps meant irritation. Slow steps meant he wanted something. The pause at the doorway meant he was watching her, deciding what version of himself to perform. "You look tired," he said, leaning against the frame with the kind of casual authority that made voters trust him and made her stomach clench. "The Meridian Club dinner is tonight. I need you sharp." "I'll be ready." "You'll be more than ready. You'll be perfect." He crossed the room in 2 strides and stood behind her, hands on her shoulders, pressing just hard enough to remind her who controlled the pressure. His reflection smiled at hers in the mirror. "That's what we are, Sienna. Perfect." She nodded. 3 years of marriage had taught her that agreement was oxygen and resistance was suffocation. Victor checked his watch, a Patek Philippe gifted by a lobbyist whose name appeared nowhere in his financial disclosures. "My mother called again. She wants to come for Thanksgiving." "That would be nice. I told her no." His grip tightened slightly. "She asks too many questions. Last time she was here, she kept looking at you like she was cataloging evidence." The word evidence hung between them like smoke. "She's just worried because I've lost weight," Sienna offered carefully. "Then gain it back." He released her shoulders and headed for the door. "And wear the navy dress tonight, the one that covers your arms." After his car pulled away, a black Suburban with tinted windows and a driver who never made eye contact, Sienna sat on the edge of the bathtub and let herself breathe. Just breathe. The simple act felt revolutionary. Her phone buzzed. A text from a number she'd memorized but never saved. Ruth Ashford. Victor's own mother. The message was 3 words. "Still there, sweetheart?" Sienna typed back with trembling fingers. "Still here." What Ruth sent next made her hands go still. "I found your father-in-law's old medical records, the ones from when Victor was 12. He saw what his father did to me, and he learned." Sienna stared at the screen. In 3 years of marriage, Victor had never once mentioned his father's violence. He'd painted his childhood as idyllic, country clubs and prep schools and summers on the Chesapeake Bay. His mother had been a ghost in his stories, mentioned only as someone who couldn't handle the pressures of political life. Now Sienna understood why. The cycle hadn't started with her, and if she didn't end it, it wouldn't stop. Have you ever realized that the monster in your life was once someone else's victim? Does that change anything, or does it make the betrayal worse? Tell me in the comments. The Meridian Club dinner was a masterclass in performance. Victor worked the room like the career politician he was, one hand holding bourbon, the other resting on the small of Sienna's back like a brand. His laugh echoed across marble floors while she calculated exit routes with the part of her brain that never slept. "Senator Ashford, your wife is stunning as always." The compliment came from Gerald Pike, the party's biggest donor, a man whose eyes lingered on Sienna's neckline with the kind of casual ownership that powerful men wore like cologne. "She's my secret weapon," Victor replied, pulling her closer. "Behind every great man, right?" Sienna smiled. The muscles required for that smile had developed their own memory, independent of anything resembling joy. In the restroom, she found herself staring at the mirror again. The fluorescent light was less forgiving than their bathroom vanity. She could see the faint yellow of a fading bruise along her jaw, the one from Tuesday when she'd accidentally interrupted his phone call with the campaign manager. Accidentally. As if anything in her life was accidental anymore. Her phone buzzed again. "Ruth, I overnighted a package to your sister's address in Richmond. Don't open it at the house. Don't tell him." Sienna didn't have a sister, but she did have a P.O. box in Richmond that Victor knew nothing about, one she'd opened 6 months ago during a supervised shopping trip when his driver had been distracted by a parking ticket. Ruth had figured that out somehow. The woman was sharper than her son gave her credit for. When Sienna returned to the ballroom, Victor was mid-anecdote about education reform, his voice carrying the righteous conviction that had won him his seat. She watched his hands gesture broadly, the same hands that had wrapped around her throat 2 weeks ago because the dry cleaning had come back late. She took her place beside him and performed. But something had shifted. The smile she wore felt different now, not like a mask, like armor. The package arrived 3 days later. Inside, Sienna found a leather journal, yellowed medical records from 1997, and a handwritten letter from Ruth Ashford that began, "I should have done this 20 years ago." The medical records documented Ruth's injuries during her marriage to Judge Lawrence Ashford. Fractured orbital bone, dislocated shoulder, 3 cracked ribs. Each injury had been coded as accidental by physicians who played golf with the judge on Saturdays. The journal was Ruth's own account. Page after page of dates, descriptions, and the slow erosion of a woman's identity under the weight of a man who believed love was spelled Control. But it was the final page that stopped Sienna's breath. Victor saw everything. He was 12 when he watched his father break my collarbone. He stood in the doorway and didn't make a sound. I thought the silence meant he was traumatized. Now I know it meant he was taking notes. Sienna sat in the parking lot of the Richmond post office and wept. Not for herself, for the 12-year-old boy who had watched his mother's destruction and decided it looked like power. Understanding didn't mean forgiving, it meant knowing exactly what she was dealing with. She pulled out the burner phone she kept taped inside the lining of her purse and called the only person who had never stopped fighting for her. Nadine Cross picked up on the first ring. "Tell me you're ready. I'm ready." Have you ever made a phone call that changed the direction of your entire life? What gave you the courage to dial? Drop a fire emoji if you've been there. Nadine Cross was not what anyone expected. A former federal prosecutor turned legal aid attorney, she operated out of a cramped office in Southeast D.C. that smelled like burned coffee and righteous fury. She'd met Sienna 2 years ago at a charity event Victor had dragged his wife to, one of those galas where rich people wrote checks to feel good about poverty they'd never experienced. Nadine had noticed Sienna flinch when a waiter dropped a tray. She'd noticed the way Victor's hand moved from Sienna's waist to her wrist when she laughed too loudly. She'd noticed because she'd spent 15 years prosecuting the men who created those flinches. After the gala, Nadine had slipped her card into Sienna's coat pocket. It took Sienna 8 months to call. 3 years of marriage, 2 years of documentation, Nadine said, spreading files across her desk. "We have hospital records from 4 separate ER visits. We have your journals. We have the security footage from the townhouse that you redirected to cloud storage. And now we have Ruth's testimony connecting Victor's behavior to a generational pattern of domestic violence." Is it enough? For a divorce? More than enough. For criminal charges? Nadine paused. "We need something public, something he can't spin or bury with his donor money. Victor Ashford controls half the judges in Northern Virginia. His campaign manager used to run crisis communications for a defense contractor. These people make problems disappear." Sienna knew that better than anyone. After her second ER visit, she'd tried to file a police report. The officer who responded had been polite, professional, and very clear. "Ma'am, are you sure you want to pursue this? Senator Ashford does a lot of good for law enforcement in this district." The message was unmistakable. Your pain is less important than his power. "There's something else," Sienna said, pulling out her phone. "Victor's running for re-election. His campaign is hosting a live town hall next month on WJLA. Family Values platform. He's planning to bring me on stage as his partner in service." Nadine's eyes narrowed. Live television. Live television. A slow smile spread across Nadine's face. Not cruel, but precise. The smile of a woman who understood that the most dangerous weapon against a liar was a camera he couldn't control. "He wants to parade you as proof of his character," Nadine said. "Then let's give the audience a real look at what that character produces." The plan took 3 weeks to build and required the kind of coordination that would have impressed a military strategist. Nadine brought in a digital forensics expert who authenticated every piece of security footage. Ruth Ashford provided a sworn affidavit and agreed to appear on camera. A trauma counselor who had been quietly treating Sienna for 18 months prepared a clinical assessment, but the most critical element came from an unexpected source: Victor's campaign assistant, a 24-year-old named Priya Vasquez, who had watched her boss scream at his wife through the thin walls of the campaign office one too many times. Priya had been quietly collecting her own documentation, emails where Victor discussed managing Sienna, text messages where he tracked her location in real time, a voicemail left accidentally when he'd pocket-dialed the campaign line that captured 45 seconds of Sienna begging him to stop. Priya brought it all to Nadine in a manila envelope and said 5 words that cracked the case wide open. "I can't sleep at night. When was the last time a stranger's courage changed your life? Sometimes the people who save us are the ones we never expected. Share your story below." Victor spent the week before the town hall in campaign mode, which meant he was almost tolerable. He needed Sienna functional, presentable, and convincingly devoted. He bought her a new dress, had the stylist come to the house, even complimented her cooking, something he hadn't done since their honeymoon. "This is going to be our moment," he told her the night before, uncorking a bottle of wine with the casual confidence of a man who believed his own mythology. "The polls show we're up 7 points when you're on camera with me. People trust a family man. They trust what they see," Sienna replied carefully. "Exactly." He raised his glass, "and what they're going to see is a united front, a man who loves his wife, a woman who supports her husband. The American dream." She clinked her glass against his and drank deeply, letting the wine burn a path to her stomach where the fear lived alongside something new, something that felt dangerously like hope. That night after Victor fell asleep, Sienna slipped into the bathroom and called Nadine on the burner phone. "Everything's in place," Nadine said. "Ruth flew in this afternoon. She's staying at my apartment. Priya has the digital package ready to send to every news desk in the Beltway the moment we go live. The forensics expert will be in the audience, and the producer at WJLA owes me a favor from the Whitman case." "What if it doesn't work?" "Then we go to the FBI on Monday morning with everything we have. But Sienna, this will work." He built his career on the image of a perfect family. "We're going to show America what perfect looks like behind closed doors." Sienna stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror one last time. Tomorrow, she wouldn't need concealer. Tomorrow, she'd wear her bruises like medals. Have you ever waited for one perfect moment to take back your power? What did it feel like when that moment finally arrived? Tell me below. The WJLA studio was smaller than it looked on television. Harsh lights turned everything flat and bright, eliminating shadows where secrets could hide. Victor arrived in full campaign mode, working the studio crew like a rally crowd, shaking hands with the kind of manufactured warmth that made ordinary people feel special for exactly the duration of his attention span. Sienna stood beside him in the navy dress, the one that covered her arms. Victor had chosen it specifically, not knowing she'd chosen to wear it for the last time. "Welcome to Virginia Voices," the moderator began, addressing the live studio audience and the cameras that would carry this broadcast to 400,000 homes. "Tonight, Senator Victor Ashford joins us with his wife Sienna to discuss his family values platform and his vision for Virginia's families." Victor launched into his opening statement with the practiced rhythm of a man who'd memorized empathy. He spoke about protecting children, supporting working mothers, investing in domestic violence prevention programs. The irony was so thick Sienna could taste it. "My wife and I believe that strong families build strong communities," Victor said, reaching for her hand. She let him take it. The cameras caught the gesture. It would be the last image of their marriage that looked anything like love. 15 minutes into the town hall, during a question about healthcare access for women, Sienna felt her phone vibrate twice in her pocket. Nadine's signal. She stood up. Victor's face registered confusion, then irritation, then the beginning of the expression she'd learned to fear. But they were on live television, in front of 400,000 witnesses. He couldn't do anything but smile. "If I may," Sienna said, her voice carrying with a steadiness that surprised even her. "I'd like to answer this question from personal experience. The moderator, who had received a very specific phone call from an old colleague named Adine Cross exactly 40 minutes earlier, nodded. "Please, Mrs. Ashford, my husband talks about protecting families. He talks about it beautifully. He's a gifted speaker." She paused. "But I need Virginia to know what happens when the cameras turn off." Victor's hand moved toward her arm. A reflex. The same reaching, grabbing motion he perfected over 3 years of private violence. But this time, every camera in the studio caught it. "For 3 years, I have been physically and emotionally abused by the man sitting next to me." Sienna's voice didn't waver. "I have hospital records, security footage, sworn testimony, and the scars to prove it." The studio erupted. Victor's face cycled through shock, fury, and the desperate calculation of a man watching his entire life collapse in real time. He opened his mouth to speak, but Sienna wasn't finished. "And I'm not the first woman he's hurt. His own mother endured the same violence from his father. She's here tonight to confirm that this is a pattern that spans generations." Ruth Ashford stood up in the third row of the studio audience. 71 years old, silver-haired and trembling, but standing. "My son learned violence from his father," Ruth said, her voice carrying the weight of decades. "And I stayed silent because I was ashamed. I am done being silent." Victor's composed mask shattered completely. "Mother, sit down. This is ridiculous. Sienna is clearly having some kind of episode." But the producer had already cut to a split screen showing security footage from the Ashford townhouse. Victor shoving Sienna into a wall, Victor's hand around her throat, Victor standing over her crumpled body with the same expression he wore when closing a legislative deal. Efficient. Satisfied. The footage played for 11 seconds before the network cut it. But 11 seconds was enough. 11 seconds was a lifetime. Have you ever seen someone's mask fall off in public? That moment when the truth was finally louder than the lie? How did it feel? Share your reaction. Within 40 minutes of the broadcast ending, Victor Ashford's world imploded with a speed and thoroughness that would have impressed the forensic accountants who would later audit his campaign finances. His campaign manager called, then hung up. His chief of staff called, then resigned. His donors called, then demanded their money back. By midnight, Priya Vasquez's digital package had reached every major news desk in Washington. The emails, the tracking data, the 45-second voicemail, each piece confirming what Sienna had declared on live television. By morning, the FBI's domestic violence unit had opened an investigation, not because of public pressure, though there was plenty, because the evidence was overwhelming, meticulously gathered over 24 months by a woman everyone had underestimated, and a mother-in-law everyone had forgotten. Victor attempted to control the narrative. He released a statement calling the allegations a coordinated political attack. He hired a crisis communications firm. He called in favors from every contact in his network. None of it mattered. The footage was everywhere. Social media turned his name into a verb. "Don't Ashford me" became shorthand for men who preached values they violated. His Senate colleagues released carefully worded statements that said nothing while communicating everything. 3 days after the broadcast, Victor was arrested outside his Georgetown townhouse. The cameras captured him in the same navy suit he'd worn to the town hall, wrists in handcuffs, eyes fixed on a point somewhere beyond the reporters, beyond the protesters, beyond the life he'd constructed on lies and violence. The charges were extensive: domestic assault, stalking using electronic communications, misuse of campaign funds to facilitate surveillance, witness intimidation based on evidence that he'd attempted to contact Ruth through intermediaries within hours of his arrest. The judge set bail at $2 million. Victor could afford it, but his accounts had been flagged pending investigation. For the first time since he was a child watching his father break his mother's bones, Victor Ashford understood what it felt like to have no power at all. Is it more powerful to watch someone fall publicly, or to know they'll never hurt anyone again? Which matters more to you? Tell me in the comments. The trial lasted 6 weeks and received more media coverage than any political scandal in Virginia's recent history. The prosecution presented 18 hours of security footage, 400 pages of documentation, testimony from emergency room physicians, Priya Vasquez's digital evidence, and Ruth Ashford's devastating account of the generational violence that had shaped her son. Victor's defense team attempted every strategy in the playbook. They questioned Sienna's mental health. They suggested Ruth was senile. They called Nadine a disgraced attorney with a vendetta. None of it stuck. The jury deliberated for 5 hours. When they returned, the foreman read the verdict without looking at Victor. Guilty on all counts. The sentencing hearing took place on a Tuesday in October, the kind of crisp autumn day that made Virginia look like a postcard. Judge Carmen Reeves, who had presided over the trial with the stern patience of a woman who'd seen enough evil to recognize it immediately, addressed Victor directly. "Mr. Ashford, you used your position, your wealth, and your power to systematically terrorize the woman who trusted you most. You exploited the very institution you claim to champion. This court finds no mitigating circumstances." She sentenced him to 18 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole for the first 12. In the gallery, Sienna held Ruth's hand. Nadine sat behind them, arms folded, watching justice arrive late but unmistakable. Victor was led from the courtroom in shackles. As he passed his mother, he paused. For a moment it looked like he might speak, but Ruth turned her face away, and Victor walked on, disappearing through a door that would separate him from the world he'd tried to own. Some people ask whether prison changes men like Victor, whether sitting alone in a cell forces them to see what they really are. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't, but here's what matters. For 18 years, he can't hurt anyone. That Tuesday evening, Sienna drove to the Potomac River and sat on a bench near the Kennedy Center, watching the water move in the fading light. Her phone had been ringing all day with interview requests, well-wishers, strangers sharing their own stories. She turned it off and let the silence fill the space where fear used to live. For the first time in 3 years, silence didn't mean danger, it meant peace. Ruth sat beside her, neither of them speaking, connected by a bond that no amount of violence could sever. Two women from two generations, both survivors of the same bloodline of brutality, both finally free. "Thank you," Sienna said after a long while. "Don't thank me. I should have spoken up 30 years ago. I should have taken Victor and left when he was still young enough to learn differently. You spoke up now, that's what matters." Ruth squeezed her hand. "What will you do next?" Sienna watched a crew team cut through the dark water, their oars moving in perfect synchrony, every stroke purposeful, every movement forward. "Something useful," she said. "Would you have the strength to turn your worst chapter into someone else's rescue? What would you build from the wreckage? Tell me your vision below." The Sienna Prescott Foundation opened its doors 14 months later in a converted firehouse in Alexandria, Virginia. The location was deliberate, a building designed to respond to emergencies, repurposed to prevent them. The foundation operated on a simple principle. Domestic violence survivors didn't need sympathy. They needed tools, legal representation, financial literacy training, secure housing, evidence-gathering technology, job placement, child care, and most critically, they needed someone who believed them the first time they spoke. Sienna funded the initial operation with the settlement from her divorce and the proceeds from Victor's seized assets. His Georgetown townhouse became a transitional shelter. His investment portfolio funded a legal clinic staffed by attorneys who worked exclusively on domestic violence cases. His campaign war chest, what remained after the legal fees, financed a technology center that taught women how to document abuse safely. "We don't just help women leave," Sienna told a packed auditorium during the foundation's first annual gala. "We help them build lives worth staying for." Nadine ran the legal clinic with the ferocity of a woman who'd spent her career watching the system fail the people it was supposed to protect. Ruth volunteered 3 days a week in the counseling center, her presence a living reminder that it was never too late to choose courage over silence. Priya Vasquez left politics entirely and became the foundation's technology director, developing an app that looked like a fitness tracker but secretly recorded audio and transmitted GPS coordinates to a secure server. Within its first year, the app helped secure evidence in 27 domestic violence cases across 8 states. And then something happened that nobody expected. 7 months after the foundation opened, Sienna's doctor confirmed what the morning sickness had been suggesting for weeks. She was pregnant. The father was someone she'd met at a grief counseling group 6 months earlier, a widower named Ellis Maddox who worked as an architect and spoke so quietly that you had to lean in to hear him, the opposite of every man who had ever tried to own her. Their relationship had grown slowly, built on the radical foundation of 2 people who asked permission before touching, who said what they meant, and who understood that love was supposed to feel safe. When Sienna told Ruth, the older woman cried for 20 minutes. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of knowing that the cycle had finally, irreversibly broken. The baby was born in April, a girl, 7 pounds and 4 ounces, with her mother's dark eyes and her father's quiet intensity. They named her Grace. Because when Sienna had been lying on her bathroom floor at 2 a.m., wondering if she'd survive until morning, she used to whisper the word to herself like a prayer. Grace, Grace, Grace. Now it was a name, a person, a future that violence almost stole but courage reclaimed. Victor learned about the birth from a letter Nadine sent to the prison, not as cruelty, but as closure. Sienna didn't owe him anything, least of all information about the life she'd built from the ruins of the one he'd destroyed. But Ruth asked her to send it. He needs to know what he lost, she said, not to punish him, but so he understands that life continued without him, and it continued beautifully. The letter was 3 sentences. Your mother is well. The foundation helps hundreds of families. There is a child in this world who will never know violence, and that is the only legacy that matters. In his cell, Victor read those words and understood, perhaps for the first time, that real power was never about control. It was about what you created when you finally let go. 18 years is a long time, long enough for Grace to grow up, graduate, and begin her own life. Long enough for the Sienna Prescott Foundation to expand to 31 states. Long enough for Ruth Ashford to pass away peacefully at 84, surrounded by women whose lives she'd helped rebuild. Long enough for the world to forget Victor Ashford entirely. And that, perhaps, was the most fitting punishment of all. Not the prison cell, not the public shame, but the irrelevance, the complete erasure of a man who had demanded to be the center of everyone's world, reduced to a footnote in a story about triumph. If this story moved you, smash that like button and subscribe for more stories about the power of resilience. Share this with someone who needs to hear that no one has to stay trapped forever. And remember, the most powerful thing you can do isn't destroy the person who hurt you. It's build a life so full of purpose that their darkness becomes nothing more than the shadow you walked through on your way to the light.